Hi guys, long time no see in a sit down video. I don't think I've done a sit down video since before the new year. I'm pretty sure I haven't. And to be honest, I just haven't really felt well enough, to be honest, to it's been much easier. Sorry, I'm looking out my window, I just saw a rabbit. It gave me such a fright. But yeah, I haven't really felt well enough. It's much easier for me to film my days as I'm doing things rather than stop and talk. But you know, we're in April now, so I'm starting to feel a bit better about it. But at the same time, my bed is still not dressed. My duvet is in the wash and things, so we're gonna just ignore that. And yeah, so today is the 2nd of April and I decided to talk about POTS syndrome. You know, POTS syndrome stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia syndrome, and essentially what POTS is, I'm going to explain it incredibly colloquially and not clinically. Essentially how POTS affected me and what POTS is that whenever I would change posture, it doesn't have to be, doing handstands, literally going from lying down to sitting up to standing, my blood pressure would drop and my heart rate would skyrocket. This is due to dysfunction in the autonomic system. And essentially that's kind of it. In terms of like a definition of POTS syndrome. But obviously, we spend so much of our lives changing our posture and changing how we move and where we're going. And, even throughout college, just sitting in a lecture hall for an hour and then standing up and walking across campus is a huge amount of posture change for the body to cope with. And so POTS syndrome really, really does affect nearly every aspect of your life if you have it. There's nothing that isn't affected, and I just thought I'd talk about it a bit more today. I'm currently 26 years old and I was not diagnosed with POTS syndrome until I was 22. This is me trying to realize the maths and be like, does that actually even make sense? Actually 21. I was 21 because I did my tilt test the day before my 21st birthday, which was a great experience. But yeah, I just thought I'd talk about it because POTS isn't something that necessarily affects me too much now. Nowadays, my main symptoms that I would still relate to POTS are poor temperature control. I still have a really bad sense of temperature control. If I get cold or if I get hot, I tend to stay cold or stay hot for much longer than, if you've taken a cold shower to cool down. That helps, but it will help a lot more slowly. It's not a very, essentially my temperature regulation is pretty broken. It's not a good system. Particularly I find, but this is also just probably to do with Ireland's climate, is that when I'm cold, I'm really, really cold. And it doesn't always match the environment around me. It doesn't always match what I'm doing or the people I'm with, or, everybody else could be in shorts and t-shirts and I'm thinking, this is impossibly freezing. So that's kind of how POTS would still affect me to this day. It does still affect when I'm tired, and if I'm fatigued from, I suppose, doing a lot of things. Just if I've had a lot of very up and down, I've had to go to the office, maybe had to go to town, maybe had to go and do my food shopping, had to drive, all of those things in one day. If I am very fatigued, still having salt, whether it's, salty pasta or salt crisps or whatever, will help. I will feel a lift slightly in my energy levels, or slightly even in just my heart rate, and everything will probably calm down and my blood pressure will rise just slightly to make everything a bit more stable. So it does still affect me in that sense. But however, my main symptoms started when I was about, I was 19 years old and I was incredibly tired all the time, but also constantly having heart palpitations. And I spoke to my GP and was referred to an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist took my heart rate when I was standing and my blood pressure when I was standing, and then took them when I was sitting, and then took them when I went from lying down to standing. And naturally there was a big drop in blood pressure and a big rise in heart rate. And he still didn't make the connection of POTS. I don't think he was particularly educated on it, which is a whole other problem to do with POTS, is just the lack of education, particularly here in Ireland. So from the ages of 19 to 21, I was undiagnosed. I went to college and struggled to do lectures. I fainted very frequently. I would faint after long days. I would faint after maybe lectures where there wasn't enough seats and I might have had to stand for maybe even just 10-15 minutes. Usually I was able to predict this. I could feel this really heavily coming on, so I would either go to the bathroom and faint, or make sure I was sitting on the ground, because I could feel myself losing my grip on stability the longer I would have to stand. I used to struggle very heavily if we were standing outside lecture halls waiting for lectures and the lectures were late. I used to struggle a lot with not just sitting on the ground right there outside the lecture hall. And some days I did. It would just depend whether I cared more about appearing like I was functioning normally, as opposed to, just doing what I needed to do to stay upright. So from 19 to 21, I was not diagnosed. I didn't really know anything about POTS myself, so it's not like I potentially thought I might have had POTS. I was also experiencing a high amount of joint pain at the time, and depending on what was going on in my life, the joint pain would be worse than my blood pressure problems. And I think when I was 21, I was referred to a rheumatologist. I think maybe the third rheumatologist I saw for my joint pain, and he diagnosed me with fibromyalgia at the time, which, now I realise I had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because I don't think he was super educated on that either and didn't particularly understand that my joints were not stable and staying in their location. But he did ask me about my autonomic system, my processing with standing up, sitting down, whether I fainted a lot, how much I would shake, trembling, numbness, headaches also are a huge part of it when your heart rate is constantly on and up and down in such extreme ways, multiple times a day, every single day. You do get such headaches, and honestly your sleep is quite disrupted, so you're also exhausted. And he referred me to see a cardiac specialist who actually in Ireland, in Limerick, he specialises in geriatric cardiac cases, I suppose, in older patients. So I remember going to the appointment with him and sitting in the waiting room with my mom, and everyone there was over the age of maybe 75, and thinking, this is weird. But I had heard he was really good at the same time with dealing with anyone of any age. And the second I was there, he ordered a tilt test, a tilt table test, I should say. And as this kind of continued, I didn't really know what to expect. I spent very little time researching my own health, just purely because I was on such survival mode. And my mom had researched a tilt table test and had told me this test usually can be quite exhausting. It can take a lot of energy. It takes a lot of, I suppose it pushes your body to the extremes. So I wasn't looking forward to it. It was also explained to me that a tilt test is a provocation test, essentially where they're trying to prove that you have POTS syndrome, which I personally think is a very crude way of diagnosing. And I only came to that conclusion after the tilt test. I attended the tilt test in August when I was 21, and it was in Limerick, and I remember arriving and staying in the waiting room. My mom has a really bad back, so she couldn't do the drive up. So I was with my dad, and we did wait. I was in the waiting room, and I was told there was 2 rooms with 2 different tilt tables, and we'd just go with whatever one was, available next. And there was a woman maybe in her 80s being led in for a tilt table test by her daughter, and now, having experienced a tilt table test, I just cannot imagine how that must have been physically at that age. I was going in at 21 and was technically healthy besides having POTS. When I went in anyway, my dad was not allowed in the nurses very kindly explained that usually when family members are in the room, they tend to want to stop the test, which immediately made me worry a bit more, because I was like, oh God, this is going to be a lot worse than I thought. But so I went in, and the tilt table is essentially just, I suppose, a surgical bed. I don't want to say surgical bed. I suppose kind of like maybe the padded beds, but slightly wider, that will be in a GP's surgery. And they lie you down on one of them. They turn off the lights because they don't want to have any stimuli that might, increase your stress. So the room was very kind of dimly lit, really just by like, I think, one window. It was very, very calm. And they had me lying down flat on the table and strapped me into the table. They then explained that they were going to tilt the table back. My head was here, and they were going to tilt the table back slightly, which, they were going to tilt it back slightly, basically to get a baseline of my heart and blood pressure for about 20 minutes. And I was to stay, we were going to stay in complete silence, nearly a meditative state. And then all of a sudden, at some point after the 20 minutes, the table was going to be tilted, I suppose, completely upright, at a complete 90-degree angle, all of a sudden, very quickly. And they were going to, I was strapped in, so I was going to be secure. There was a base for my feet, and I was going to have to, essentially, the test runs for 40 minutes where they monitor your heart rate and your blood pressure, and they try to prove POTS syndrome by seeing how quickly you pass out. I was really nervous at this point. I was so nervous because I just don't like sudden things. I really don't. Also, this just isn't pleasant anyway. It's not like, going on a roller coaster and you're expecting a jump or anything like that. This was, I knew, going to be physically challenging and weird. So when the table was pulled to the 90-degree angle, out of the 40 minutes, I think I lasted 17 minutes before I passed out. I asked for water. The nurses told me they couldn't give me anything that would help or possibly keep me conscious for any longer. And I threw up on myself, which was a great experience. And I passed out. And then when I woke up, I was tilted back down with my head here because they were trying to get blood back to my brain and heart. And I stayed like that for about 40 minutes. And they said, well, basically they congratulated me, and they're like, oh, well done, you proved it, that you have POTS. And that was great, even though I felt awful. And I felt awful for about a week after. It just felt like it took a long time for my body to get back to a regulated state. If I can call it a regulated state, I suppose my normal level of ill health rather than an extreme version. So yeah, that wasn't great. That really wasn't great. After that, I saw my consultant and was prescribed beta blockers and midodrine tablets. A very low dose of both. I ultimately ended up staying on them for about 2 years, until I realized the beta blockers were doing nothing for me, and midodrine essentially blocked my ability. Midodrine has a very odd side effect, very rare side effect, but an odd one for strengthening the neck of the bladder, to basically, which has the negative result of stopping you being able to go to the bathroom. So that did affect me, and I tried to go on lower doses of midodrine, which I did actually find really good for keeping me upright for longer, keeping my stability steady for longer. I didn't have more energy or anything, but it did definitely help. But I ended up coming off it completely because going to the bathroom was deemed more important. So that was essentially that, really, to be honest. And that's my experience with POTS, because from that point on, which was I think maybe 2015 to 2017 was when my health turned around a lot, and I changed my diet and started on different supplements and got diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and was able to manage my life a lot better. Up until that point then, I just kind of managed it with salt and diurolites, which are a type of drink I think you can get from the pharmacy that are an electrolyte drink, and they were very helpful and beneficial. But on occasion, yeah, I don't think that was pretty much it as regards my POTS journey. Nowadays, like I said, it still affects me to a degree. That salt does help my fatigue, or my temperature control is still bad. But in terms of, POTS took over about 100% of my life, and now it's probably 5% of my life. Still, I do notice, if I give blood, my heart rate does drop. I am very sensitive to anything to do with low blood pressure. And that will always be, my blood pressure still remains, even when I'm steady and sitting, on the lower end of everything. So that's kind of my POTS journey. And I suppose that was essentially what I wanted to talk about, just have a brief chat about. I didn't want it to be super structured because I'm still struggling, I think, in a lot of ways to talk about these experiences and these somewhat traumatic health experiences, to be honest, of my early 20s and late teens, and talk about them in a coherent way. So sometimes just me, spitfiring a bit like this actually does help me a lot. Yeah, I found, so that's my POTS journey. And now I don't particularly tell people that I've been diagnosed with POTS, because I don't really need to. It's on my records with my GP, but now it's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and at the time it was too, hypermobility type. That is kind of, my main diagnosis. And POTS is incredibly common. If you have EDS, hypermobility type, it is incredibly common. So it's not super shocking, but I'm very glad that I don't still have those, I suppose, horrific experiences of constantly fainting and things like that. I will still be more inclined to be lightheaded than people around me. I'm more sensitive to temperature changes, being in the heat, all of those things, but it's much more manageable than, standing in a queue in a shop and thinking you're going to pass out if they don't take you in the next 2 seconds. So yeah, let me know if you have any similar experiences. I just kind of wanted to talk about it and honestly film a sit down video and just have a bit of a chat and see where I'm at, because at the moment I'm still figuring out my life with EDS. I'm still figuring out my life with having somehow good health, but also somehow not, and figuring out how to make that the most livable version of life that I can. And POTS is a big part of that and a big part of my history. So yeah, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you made it to the end of this, I really appreciate it. Obviously it's super, off the cuff video, but I really do appreciate it, and I hope you're well, and yeah, I hope you have a great week.